It only takes a few minutes of watching Daniel Moder to understand the kind of person he is. He is not loud, not flashy, and not someone who tries to stand in the spotlight. In fact, he has spent most of his life doing the exact opposite. While the world knows Julia Roberts as one of the biggest movie stars of all time, the man behind the camera, her husband, has quietly built a life that many people never fully noticed. Daniel Moder is a cinematographer, someone who helps shape the way films look and feel, but his story is not just about cameras and movies. It is also about love, privacy, family, and the choices a person makes when life becomes uncertain. Over the years, people have started to look more closely at him, especially as rumors and questions about his wife's health began to grow. Suddenly, the quiet man who stayed in the background became part of a much bigger conversation. And now, many are asking the same question: is Daniel Moder stepping away from everything because of what his wife is going through? Daniel Moder was born on January 31st, 1969, in Los Angeles, California. His life did not begin in the glamorous world that many people imagine when they think about Hollywood. While it is true that his father worked in the film industry as a producer, the reality was far less shiny. His father worked on smaller, low-budget films, the kind that did not always succeed or bring in steady money. This meant that Daniel grew up in a home where things were not always stable. His mother worked as a teacher, doing her best to keep the family balanced and secure. Together, his parents raised 5 children in a modest home in Santa Monica. Life was busy, sometimes chaotic, and far from perfect. There were no luxury vacations or easy paths laid out for him. Instead, Daniel grew up learning how to adapt, how to observe, and how to stay grounded even when things around him felt uncertain. As a child, Daniel was known for being quiet and thoughtful. He was not the kind of kid who demanded attention. Instead, he watched people. He noticed small details that others often missed. This way of seeing the world would later become one of his greatest strengths. By the time he was around 12 years old, he had already started experimenting with cameras. He would take simple photos, studying how light changed a person's face or how emotions could be captured in a single moment. While other kids might have been focused on sports or social activities, Daniel found himself drawn to something more subtle. He was interested in understanding people, not just talking to them. This interest grew stronger as he got older and eventually influenced the path he chose in life. After finishing high school, Daniel made a decision that surprised some people. Instead of trying to enter the film industry right away through his father's connections, he chose to leave California and attend the University of Colorado Boulder. There, he studied psychology, a subject that matched his natural curiosity about human behavior. On the surface, it looked like he was moving away from filmmaking, but in reality, something deeper was happening. During his time in college, he continued to explore photography and film on his own. He worked with small cameras, experimented with short films, and spent long hours learning through practice rather than formal training. College gave him the space to grow without pressure, allowing his interests in psychology and visual storytelling to come together in a natural way. When Daniel graduated in 1992, he returned to Los Angeles with very little money and no clear plan. What he did have, however, was determination. He did not walk into the film industry with open doors waiting for him. Instead, he started at the bottom, taking small jobs and working hard to prove himself. He made phone calls, searched for opportunities, and accepted whatever work he could find. These early years were not easy. The work was often physical, the hours were long, and the pay was low. But Daniel did not give up. Step by step, he began to learn how the industry really worked. He gained experience, built relationships, and slowly moved forward. This period of struggle helped shape the person he would become. It taught him patience, discipline, and the importance of staying focused even when progress feels slow. And although no one knew it at the time, this quiet, steady journey was laying the foundation for a career and a life that would later draw the attention of millions. As Daniel Moder slowly entered the world of film work, he did not do it in a dramatic or sudden way. There was no big moment where he became famous overnight or landed a major role that changed everything instantly. Instead, his path was built step by step, through small jobs that many people in Hollywood never even talk about. When he came back to Los Angeles after finishing college, He started from the very bottom of the film industry. He worked as a production assistant, which is one of the most basic and demanding jobs on a film set. In this role, he was responsible for many small but important tasks like moving equipment, helping crew members, and making sure things ran smoothly behind the scenes. It was not glamorous work, and it did not bring attention or recognition, but it gave him something valuable: experience. Working on film sets like Crimson Tide in 1995, Daniel began to understand how large movie productions actually function. These were not small projects. They were big studio films with strict schedules, high pressure, and hundreds of people working together. As a production assistant, he had to learn quickly. He carried heavy equipment, followed instructions carefully, and stayed alert for long hours. The work was physically tiring, but it also taught him discipline. He saw how every small action mattered in the bigger picture. A mistake from one person could delay an entire day of filming, costing thousands of dollars. This environment forced him to stay focused and responsible at all times. After gaining some experience, Daniel slowly moved into more technical roles within the camera department. This was an important shift because it brought him closer to the part of filmmaking he was truly interested in: visual storytelling. He began working as a camera loader and assistant camera operator. These roles required more skill and understanding of how cameras work, how film is handled, and how shots are prepared. He was no longer just helping on the edges of production. He was now part of the team responsible for capturing the actual images seen on screen. This transition was not easy. It required patience, learning, and the willingness to start over in a new position, even after gaining experience elsewhere. As he continued working through the late 1990s, Daniel's reputation in the industry began to grow quietly. He worked on films like Enemy of the State and The Fan, where he gained more hands-on experience with camera movement, lighting setups, and complex action scenes. These projects were intense, often involving fast-paced shooting environments where everything had to be done quickly and correctly. Daniel learned how to stay calm under pressure, how to adjust to sudden changes, and how to support the main camera crew without disrupting the flow of production. He was not the person in charge, but he was becoming someone people could rely on. That reliability is something that would define his career in the years to come. What made Daniel different from many others in the industry was not just his technical skill, but his attitude. He was known for being quiet, respectful, and focused. He did not try to stand out or draw attention to himself. Instead, he concentrated on doing his job well. On busy film sets, where stress levels were often high, this kind of personality was valuable. Directors and senior crew members began to notice that he was dependable. He showed up on time, completed tasks without complaint, and handled difficult situations without creating conflict. In an industry where ego can often cause problems, Daniel's calm and steady approach made him stand out in a different way. By the early 2000s, he had moved further up the ladder and became a camera operator on major Hollywood films. This was a significant step in his career. Now, he was directly responsible for how scenes were filmed and how the camera moved during action sequences. He worked on big productions such as Spider-Man 3, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Deja Vu. These films were large, complex, and required a high level of technical skill. As a camera operator, Daniel had to make quick decisions about framing, movement, and timing. He was no longer just following instructions. He was actively shaping what the audience would see on screen. This role required both creativity and precision. Even as his career progressed, Daniel never changed his quiet nature. He continued to avoid the spotlight, focusing instead on the work itself. While actors and directors often received public attention, he remained behind the scenes, doing the job without seeking recognition. This approach became a defining part of his identity in Hollywood. People who worked with him respected his professionalism, but many outside the industry had no idea who he was. And that was exactly how he seemed to prefer it. Over time, however, his personal life would begin to draw more attention than his professional one, especially after his marriage to Julia Roberts became public. But during this early phase of his career, Daniel Moder was simply known as a hardworking, skilled, and reliable camera professional who was steadily building his place in Hollywood, one film at a time. As Daniel Moder moved deeper into his career, his work began to change in a way that was not sudden, but very steady and natural. After years of working as a camera operator on big Hollywood films, he started to step into a more creative and responsible role: cinematography. This shift was important because it meant he was no longer just capturing images under direction. He was now helping decide how those images should feel, look, and emotionally affect the audience. Cinematography is often described as the eye of a film, and Daniel slowly became known for having a very specific kind of eye. His style was not loud or flashy. Instead, it was soft, natural, and focused on real human emotion. One of the key things that defined Daniel's visual style was his love for natural light and simple setups. While many modern films use heavy lighting, digital effects, and complex camera movements, Daniel often preferred a more grounded approach. He liked to keep scenes looking real, almost as if the audience was simply watching life unfold instead of watching a carefully built movie set. This meant using practical light sources like windows, lamps, and outdoor sunlight whenever possible. It also meant keeping the camera close to the actors, focusing on faces, expressions, and small emotional changes. He believed that the smallest movements in a person's face could tell more about a story than large, dramatic camera tricks. As he worked on more projects, this style became clearer. Films like Fireflies in the Garden allowed him to explore softer emotional storytelling, where the visuals supported quiet and personal moments. Instead of trying to make everything look polished or perfect, he embraced imperfection. Shadows, warm tones, and slightly unbalanced frames became part of his visual language. Later projects continued to build on this idea. In smaller films like Highland Park and Plush, Daniel used limited budgets as an advantage rather than a problem. When there were fewer lights or fewer resources, he focused more on mood, composition, and emotional depth. This made his work feel intimate and human, even when the stories themselves were simple or understated. Over time, people in the industry began to recognize him as a cinematographer who cared more about emotion than style. This is not a common approach in Hollywood, where many films aim for visual perfection or dramatic impact. Daniel's work stood out because it felt honest. He did not try to overwhelm the audience with technique. Instead, he tried to bring them closer to the characters. This approach became even more visible in projects like The Normal Heart, where emotional storytelling was extremely important. The film dealt with serious themes, and Daniel's camera work helped create a feeling of closeness and urgency. The lighting was soft, the framing was tight, and the overall look supported the emotional weight of the story. This work earned him critical recognition and even award nominations, showing that his quiet style had real impact. As his career developed further, Daniel continued to expand his range. He worked on projects that were very different from each other in tone and style. In Secret in Their Eyes, he balanced emotional storytelling with tension and mystery. In Ben is Back, he used handheld camera work to create a feeling of closeness and emotional pressure, almost trapping the viewer inside the character's experience. In contrast, in lighter films like A Family Affair, he showed that he could also handle brighter, more polished visuals when needed. This ability to adapt without losing his identity as a cinematographer became one of his strongest qualities. However, one of the most important moments in his later career came with the film Flag Day in 2021. This project was deeply personal and emotionally heavy, telling a story based on real-life events and family struggles. Daniel worked closely with director Sean Penn, and the film was shot using 16mm film cameras to create a softer, more memory-like visual texture. The goal was not to make everything look clean or modern, but to make it feel like fragments of memory, slightly faded, emotional, and imperfect. This choice matched Daniel's natural style perfectly. He used soft lighting, handheld movement, and close framing to create a feeling of intimacy and emotional closeness on set. The collaboration between Daniel and Sean Penn became very strong over time. At first, they had different ideas about how the film should look, but instead of conflict, they slowly built trust. They spent time discussing the mood of the film, the emotional tone of scenes, and how the camera should support the story. Eventually, they found a shared vision. Daniel's cinematography helped the actors deliver more natural performances because the camera never felt distant or intrusive. It stayed close, almost like an observer rather than a controller. Critics later described the film's visuals as soft, emotional, and dreamlike, with a strong sense of memory and nostalgia. By the time Flag Day was released, Daniel Moder was no longer just a behind-the-scenes technician in Hollywood. He had become a cinematographer with a recognizable emotional style. His work was not about showing off technical skill, but about capturing feeling. And in many ways, this film marked a turning point, not just in his career, but in how people saw him. For the first time, his work and his personal life seemed to overlap in a way that made people pay closer attention to him. And after this point, discussions about his career began to shift, slowly connecting his professional choices with his private world in ways that would later become part of a much bigger public conversation. After Flag Day was released in 2021, something noticeable began to happen in Daniel Moder's professional life. His work, which had always been steady and consistent, started to appear less frequently in major film credits. For years before that, he had been regularly involved in big Hollywood productions, working on films and television projects that kept him active and visible within the industry. But after Flag Day, there was a clear slowdown. This did not happen overnight, but over time people began to notice that fewer major projects were being attached to his name. Instead, there were smaller mentions, projects in development, or films that never fully moved into the spotlight. This change naturally led to questions. In Hollywood, when a person becomes less active, especially someone with an established career, people often try to find reasons. In Daniel's case,